Chapter 10. Diagnosis and Treatment, End Notes and More Case Stories. The state of easy belief, the unreality of matter-fad diets, breathing and meditation, exercises the teachings of prosperity conquering human weaknesses, first obsession and multiple personality, the case of the twin brothers, the basic principles of treatment, strict but comprehensive guidance, the physical examination, emotional frustrations, the irremediable, the cooperative, the mistaker's restoration to normality. The state of easy belief. When a certain elderly duchess stacked one chair on top of another and received her guests from her throne, some believed that her grace was suffering from delusions of grandeur. But she was a brilliant lady and a charming hostess, so her peculiarity was dismissed as a possible result of her Habsburg blood. If the Duchess had been metaphysical, her eccentricity with chairs would have been considered proof that she was a very advanced soul who had chosen that elevated position to protect her vibrations from earthly contamination. A prominent occultist some years ago was so concerned about the possibility of his refined psychic energy being drained that he only shook hands while wearing black gloves. Since none of the world's saviors, prophets, or religious leaders needed protection, it can be safely assumed that silk gloves belong metaphysically to the same category as the Duchess's two chairs. When the mind has reached that state of easy belief in which it can discover mystical wonders where none exist, life's difficulties multiply infinitely. An Eastern master who was noticeably cross-eyed solemnly informed his disciples that he belonged to an advanced type of humanity, and that in the sixth root race, all humans will have strabismus so that they can see more easily with their pineal glands. An initiated lady, who wore loose clothing and taught esoteric mysteries, suffered from a conspicuous goiter. She assured her devotees that this enlargement of the thyroid was definitive proof that she was an adept. Lost continents have always intrigued mystery lovers, and a widespread belief among them is that a new landmass is emerging in the Pacific. This may well be true, as the distribution of land and water is constantly changing. But it's certain that those living now won't be around to see California become an island state. Similarly, the emerging continent can hardly be considered a good real estate investment right now. But it seems a group of optimists has been selling shares in the Bank of Lemuria, which is underwater. Incidentally, the sales have been quite substantial. The assets are deep submerged at the time of this writing, but surveys indicate they are slowly rising, and when the assets reach the surface, the investors will be rich. According to recent reports, the United States government granted a visa to a citizen of Atlantis. But this isn't as unbelievable as it seems. There is a small island in the Bahamas that has been named Atlantis. The people of this island have gone so far as to issue their own postage stamps. These stamps, valid only for local use, are not recognized by the International Postal Union. The enthusiasts of the approaching continent are for the most part an enthusiastic bunch, but there are devotees who imagine an imminent cataclysm, and these are given to pessimistic speculations. Some of them expect the Atlantic coast to disappear. Others say the Mississippi Valley will be flooded, and still others are moving from place to place to escape the anticipated earthquakes and tsunamis. There are members of some cults who sincerely believe that only their fervent prayers and meditations have prevented the complete destruction of the American continent. These well-meaning people are wasting a great deal of energy and causing much unnecessary alarm and nervous stress. Their thinking resembles that of the anxious people of the last century who sold their homes and sat on benches with their money in hand, waiting for the world to end. I had the misfortune, some years ago, of attending a conference where a prominent speaker captivated a sizable audience while explaining how the moon was going to explode and how fragments would fall to Earth, killing everyone who didn't join his movement. Such nonsense is harmful to people of poor judgment and rigid faith, the unreality of matter. Many people suffering from physical ailments have ignored their bodily symptoms, falsely attributing their illnesses to metaphysical causes. While it is true that physical illnesses are often due to personality and character flaws, it is utterly ridiculous to neglect or deny illness simply out of a desire to disbelieve in the reality of the physical world. An interesting case of this kind comes to mind. It involves a lecturer who enjoyed the reality of coffee while simultaneously denying the reality of caffeine. His reasoning went something like this: the next time you think coffee will keep you awake at night, stand in front of a mirror and drink a large cup of coffee. Then ask yourself if the caffeine affects the reflection in the mirror in the slightest. If the reflection hasn't been affected, why should you suffer? After all, man is only a reflection of the spirit, and his material existence is an illusion. He didn't speculate on the possibility that the coffee reflected in the mirror might be decaffeinated. The common prejudice of metaphysicians against medical science and the discoveries resulting from modern research can have disastrous consequences. A truly ill person makes the wisest decision by consulting a qualified physician and not relying solely on passive treatments or positive attitudes. Good intentions do help, but in most cases, they do not replace the coordinated services of experts with a lifetime of practical experience with illness. Many come to me seeking help with their religious problems when their issues are entirely physical. Once the physical condition is corrected, much more can be achieved with the mental and psychological difficulties. Fad diets. Truth seekers seem particularly susceptible to dietary fads. Not long ago, health movements took on the proportions of religions, and some outlandish doctrines were taught. While some of these health cults were quite wholesome and useful, others had nothing to offer but laxatives and bad advice. The laxatives might have served a useful purpose, but the advice was worthless. These diets, variously circumscribed and limited by religious beliefs, aggravated physical ailments and stimulated functional disorders. Vegetarians became bloated with starch, and raw food addicts had problems with parasites and pesticides. When the system rebelled against its master's notions, unpleasant symptoms were interpreted as attacks by black magicians, or as low vibrations sent by enemies or relatives. When faced with what appears to be a metaphysical illness, the first step is to assess the patient's physical health. Often, no further investigation is necessary. Several cases of vampirism I've encountered turned out to be anemia or other debilitating illnesses. At least one case was a direct result of attempting to improve one's spirituality through excessive fasting. Psychological persecution is often nothing more than a physical weakness aggravated by phobias. Breathing and meditation exercises. Eastern breathing exercises have caused many problems among Western students, not because they have opened the chakras or stimulated the kundalini, but because they altered the student's body rhythm. Everyone has a normal breathing rate. This can be abnormal due to emotional distress or physical illness, but when this rhythm is disrupted by the mind, and the natural flow of breathing is controlled by will, the likely result is a nervous disorder. Even more dangerous than breathing exercises is the stress and tension generated by the effort of concentrating and meditating when one's temperament is not suited to such activities. Desperately trying to reach the various spiritualized states described in books or explained by some Eastern master, the student goes through cycles of hope and despair, which poses a real challenge to their constitution. Hallucinations often accompany such an effort. After practicing yoga for a few weeks, a disciple proudly told me that he had attained cosmic consciousness, entered the Absolute, passed through it, and emerged victorious at the summit. But when his cult declared that it could grant absolute consciousness to its members, a rival organization immediately promised its followers super-absolute consciousness. Then, not to be outdone, a third group offered absolute consciousness as a special incentive. Since none of the promises could be fulfilled, there was no particular point to be made. My collection of case histories includes several related to the havoc wreaked by developmental exercises. In one case, the damage was definitively due to the overstimulation of the psychic centers. It was a case in which the student had been practicing yoga for almost 20 years and had neglected to harmonize his physical and emotional nature with the yogic disciplines. He failed to realize that it is fatal to perform advanced esoteric exercises while simultaneously nurturing personal grudges and a bad temper. The Hindu master involved in this tragedy was a good and cultured man, completely sincere. He simply did not understand Westerners, and it never occurred to him that a student would attempt to develop his spiritual faculties without correcting his personal faults as he progressed. The average metaphysically minded person is protected from serious consequences by their lack of patience and continuity of purpose. They study one system of development, and, if enlightenment doesn't come within a few weeks, they move on to another teacher who promises faster results. While this process is demoralizing, it may be less severe than the consequences of actually attempting a long program of sustained effort in the wrong direction. Eastern exercises are not the only ones that can cause difficulties. A disciple of a Western sect followed their instructions to the letter. He placed a lit candle on each side of a mirror and gazed into his own eyes. The result was a form of self-hypnosis. The poor man couldn't remove his reflections from his own eyes and eventually collapsed due to a hysterical convulsion. The experience cured him of further experimentation in that direction, but the nervous shock caused him several months of suffering. Most occult organizations are blissfully unaware that their doctrines, prohibitions, or esoteric practices can cause problems. When you point out to the leader the chaos unfolding within his cult, he assures you that his teachings are in no way to blame. Because the instructions are divinely inspired, and if anything is wrong, the members themselves are to blame. The teachings of prosperity. Certain prosperity teachings must also be mentioned because of their demoralizing effect on health. One lady told me it was truly astonishing how she could obtain anything she wanted by visualizing her desire and then demanding that the universe grant it. She had acquired a nice house this way, and at that moment she was holding the thought about a wealthy gentleman whose current wife had to be eliminated so that he could be hers. It had never occurred to the lady that she was concentrating on things she had never earned the right to have, and that others would be harmed, in this case, an innocent wife. All her mental decrees had been backed by a series of dishonest and despicable schemes, which she justified by her religious belief that everyone has a divine right to whatever they ardently desire. Less violent forms of prosperity delusion include the process of sitting back and waiting for the universe to provide. This is nothing more than a highly esoteric form of laziness. A man who had followed this formula excitedly and in detail described to me the proof of divine providence in his life. He urgently needed $100 to continue his studies on mystical abundance. He simply waited, knowing that God would provide. He was right, because his loving mother gave him the money she had been saving for his medical care. It never occurred to this man that he should earn the $100. He was content simply to sit back and hold the thought, and he was foolishly proud of his demonstration of cosmic availability. Procedures like these cannot fail to have a detrimental effect on human life. Existence is a kind of balanced struggle for survival and purpose. People become strong and wise through struggle and effort. When the incentives to live are confused with irrational beliefs, all parts of the personality suffer, for a person cannot be happy or healthy unless they are bearing their share of the common burden. Nature punishes both the drone and the swindler by making their misdeeds the basis of their compensatory misfortunes. Criticizing or exposing religious fraud is resented by many who believe we should only see the good in these beliefs, whether they actually have any good or not. It is considered unspiritual to point out that a well-intentioned individual can harm themselves and others when their fundamental beliefs are flawed. Very few of us like to accept responsibility for our own mistakes. It's much more pleasant to attribute such failures to circumstances beyond our control. Under certain conditions, mysticism can become a magnificent new excuse for criminals. Conquering human weaknesses first. Mrs. Marjorie Metzger explained to me that before discovering the truth, her temperament was very unstable. But now, this entire dispositional equation had been clarified. Only one small problem still bothered her. When Marjorie was in the company of people with low vibrations, the negative forces they radiated were so disturbing to her sensibilities that she became violently agitated and said many nasty and hateful things. Mrs. Metzger hadn't thought that people with low vibrations were just people who disagreed with her opinions. She had to tell her that her psychic outbursts were nothing more than her bad temper, which she had nurtured for a long time. Arnold Weaver was a chronic alcoholic who had made several unsuccessful attempts to break the habit. He learned from leafing through occult literature that the spirits of deceased drunks haunted bars, tempting the weak to destruction. Apparently, these disembodied entities found satisfaction in merging with the auras of living drunks. Because this explanation pleased Mr. Arnold, since the fault wasn't truly his, it made the task of resolving his problem take longer and become much more complicated. Eleanor Mason remained single until middle age to care for her domineering and demanding mother. When her mother finally died, Eleanor was devastated. Her mother's ashes were placed in a silver urn, which she set on a shelf in her room, arranged like a shrine. Miss Mason would sit for hours before the urn, weeping and lamenting, and begging her mother to return. But one day she read in a book of metaphysics that it was wrong to do this, because it might cause her mother's spirit to remain on earth. Now convinced that she had brought suffering to her parents' souls, a distraught Eleanor attempted suicide by taking an overdose of sedatives. She recovered, but her health was permanently impaired. These are the kinds of stories one hears, day after day, from those who have lost their way in their search for truth. Each tale differs slightly, but the underlying principle is always the same. Religious teachings, intended to make life happier and healthier, have led to misfortune and suffering. Students of the occult need to understand that the spiritual arts are not for the weak, but for the strong, not for the confused, but for those with sound minds and moral courage. The fearful and anxious are unfit for philosophy. Without first conquering simple human weaknesses, knowledge is a useless burden that weighs down the spirit. When the ancient Israelites built their tabernacle in the wilderness, they divided the people of the 12 tribes into 3 classes of worshippers. The crowds gathered in the large open plaza in front of the temple to pray, make offerings, and listen to the moral counsel of the priests. The priests met in the inner courtyard to discuss deeper matters and worship in a more learned manner. Only the high priest could enter the Holy of Holies, where the Spirit of the Lord hovered between the wings of the cherubim. The high priest had a rope tied to his foot as he approached the mercy seat. If a worldly or unholy thought entered his mind while he was in the presence of the Lord, he would be struck dead. Since the other priests could not enter the Holy of Holies, they would drag the body out of the sanctuary with the rope tied to his foot. Despite the foolish talk about new dispensations, under which all humanity may study the sacred sciences, the ancient laws remain valid and always will. As the great Maimonides so wisely pointed out, The moral parts of religions are suitable for most people, the philosophical parts are suitable for the few who dedicate their lives to such studies, and the spiritual parts are reserved for the very few whom God Himself will select from among the learned. For the masses, it is better that their worship be at the doorstep, and many religious people would be safer and happier in the old simple faith of their fathers. He makes a sad mistake who tries to force his way into holy places beyond his power of understanding. Spiritual mysteries cannot be brought down to the level of the uneducated. Esoteric sciences cannot be simplified. They are already simple for the wise, but must remain unintelligible to the ignorant until the very end. Obsession and multiple personality. The most spectacular of all metaphysical afflictions is obsession. In occult terminology, obsession means the possession of the victim's mind or body by an external, usually disembodied, intelligence. In its psychological definition, an obsession is a persistent and inescapable preoccupation with an often unreasonable idea or emotion. Therefore, it is quite possible to be obsessed with the obsession of being obsessed. In medieval times, it was believed that a man could be haunted or possessed by the devil, or by some evil spirit such as a demon. These malevolent entities were exorcised by the church with the help of rituals, holy water, and sacred relics. It was customary to make a small hole in the floor of the room where witches were interrogated or tortured. When the demons were expelled from their victim's body, they could take the form of a rat and escape through the prepared opening. If the hole wasn't made, the spirits could enter one of the inquisitors. In modern belief, the possessing entity is usually recognized as human or elemental. Current religious practices teach that spirit possession is often mistaken for madness, and that materialistic doctors treat it inadequately because they fail to recognize the difference between obsession and true madness. And indeed, such errors are quite possible. I have been observing numerous cases of alleged obsession, and they have provided an excellent opportunity to examine this strange phenomenon. Present in most cases, multiple personality has been the primary factor. Almost all have been to some extent, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Among mystical beliefs, there is much discussion about higher and lower natures and the eternal conflict between them. As Goethe put it, two souls struggle within our bodies. Thus, Faust and Sub-Faust fight for dominance. The dominant personality comes to be recognized as the normal self, and the submerged personality remains unrecognized unless some unusual event reverses the polarities. A personality can be fractured by the violent suppression of a group of normal, natural impulses. An overdose of indoctrination can cause an explosion of the very thing it seeks to prevent. Clear evidence of this is the old belief that the minister's son is bound to be bad. An excess of early doctrines will cause the mind to turn against all religious convictions. Nothing good is achieved by inhibiting normal mental, emotional, or physical tendencies. The self-correcting mechanism in human nature will eventually force the release of inhibited impulses. If the inhibitions have been intense for a long period of time, the process of release can produce disastrous results. A quiet, patient husband endured his wife's cruel and bitter anger for 25 years without losing his temper. Then, one morning, he killed her with an axe. If this man had expressed his righteous indignation from time to time throughout their married life, his wife would have been a better woman, and he would not have ended up a murderer. He held back his anger for too long for a just cause, and the result was tragedy. A young girl from an extremely poor family spent many hours each day gazing into shop windows at beautiful things she could not afford. Later, a fortunate couple gave her the means to buy whatever she desired. But it was too late. Years of inhibition had destroyed her ability to enjoy the things she had once longed for. Then, suddenly, This Mrs. Winters, as we will call her, developed kleptomania. She began by stealing small items and was quite content with the little things she stole, but found no pleasure in the things she bought. Mr. Winters discreetly went and paid the shopkeepers for the stolen goods, without his wife's knowledge. This woman was obsessed with two fixations: a love of beautiful things, and the knowledge, ingrained since childhood, that buying them was an unforgivable extravagance, as wasting money foolishly meant depriving her family of food. This became so deeply ingrained in her subconscious that, in adulthood, the things she desired brought her no happiness unless she could possess them without spending a significant amount of money. Another girl, one day returning home from school, was the victim of criminal exhibitionism. Had little Florence followed her first impulse, which was to run home and tell her parents, she most likely would not have suffered serious harm. But when the girl arrived home, she was suffering from a hysterical fit and was afraid to describe what had happened. In the privacy of her room, Florence relived the terrible experience hundreds of times, and a serious psychological condition developed. Even so, this delicately balanced fixation could have been neutralized by a fortunate romance or a happy marriage. But at the end of her teens, Florence had a bad relationship, and this caused the fixation to become a full-blown obsession. Her entire personality changed very rapidly, and when the mechanism of aversion took full hold and assumed the proportions of an obsession, Florence developed pronounced lesbian tendencies. The case of the twin brothers. One morning my phone rang, and a male voice on the other end casually asked me, "Can you do anything for a man who is someone else?" The story was this: two twin brothers, though not identical, had volunteered for military service in the First World War. Harry and George were intensely devoted to each other and had never been apart until their enlistment. Overseas, a few weeks before the armistice, Harry was killed in action. When George heard the news, he collapsed and was confined to his home, suffering from what was then called shell shock. As he recovered, George discovered with astonishment that he was no longer himself, but his brother Harry. He had kept this strange secret for several years, but gradually a deep concern arose in his mind. If Harry had taken his body, what had happened to his own consciousness? Was he, George, wandering the spirit world while he, Harry, selfishly lived on in the other's body? He, like Harry, was perfectly willing to die if George could return. But could he, George, return and use the body that had been taken from him? As is often the case, the causes of the problem revealed themselves. The first clue was in the phone call. When George asked, "Can you do anything for a man who is someone else?" it was George asking about Harry. Throughout his narrative, it was George who knew it was Harry. It was George, as Harry, who was willing to die for Harry as George. If Harry had taken his brother's body, he wouldn't have said "after Harry died in France," but rather "after I died in France." This was a case of obsession with an idea, not possession by a spirit. The twin brothers had been very close, and each held a vivid image of the other in their subconscious mind. Mourning imposed Harry's mental image onto George's personality, and he genuinely believed he was his brother. Harry's psychic personality was constructed from memories, supplemented by George's own conclusions about his brother's temperament. Suggestion therapy soon cleared up his confusion. Mrs. Yeaman developed a curious hallucination. She was convinced that her only child, a daughter who had died at the age of 9, had returned on several occasions from the spirit world and manifested herself through her mother's body, possessing it for several hours at a time. During these periods, Mrs. Yeaman seemed to transform into a little girl. Even her voice changed, and she chatted to dolls, toys, and teddy bears. Many spiritualists believe that children who die continue to mature in the spirit world, but little Constance never matured, because her mother could not visualize her beyond the age of 9. This was yet another case of obsession with an idea. James Abbott claimed that his body was possessed without his consent by an Eastern mystic who preferred to manifest his presence without assuming a physical form. While possessed by the spirit of this Hindu, James gave learned discourses on Asian metaphysics. He insisted that he could not have delivered the discourses himself, but, when questioned, he admitted that he had attended many lectures by yogis and swamis. The topics of these lectures had not been retained in his conscious mind, but all had been adequately registered in his subconscious, later emerging through this apparent obsession. In many alleged cases of spiritual possession, the entity has a lower mental and moral order than the supposed victim. This is because it is common to suppress the less desirable aspects of one's character, and these accumulate in the repressed personality. When an obsession completely corrupts one's moral nature, it is safe to assume that the obsession is a symptom of deeply repressed, depraved tendencies. Over the years, there have been some cases of genuine hidden obsession. It is worth noting an experience related to these rare cases. My library contains several ancient magical manuscripts, including some dealing with rituals for exorcising evil spirits and demons. It occurred to me to try these medieval formulas on Otto Fertig, who was having serious trouble with some kind of entity. Strangely enough, the spells were effective almost immediately. The troublesome spirit, whatever it was, fled in haste and never returned. If there is reasonable suspicion that a case of spiritual possession is genuine, the simplest remedy is to change the affected person's mental patterns. If their life shifts to a new structure, the entity is likely to leave. Improving physical health, taking an interest in new things in life, and maintaining a normal, positive attitude make the body an uncomfortable place for the uninvited guest. Obsessions, both psychological and occult, generally occur in highly neurotic individuals, and overcoming the neurosis resolves these types of phenomena. The basic principles of treatment. It is always easier to prevent a mental disorder than to get rid of one once it has taken full hold. False teachings and inadequate study methods are the primary causes of metaphysical health problems, making it clear that prevention efforts should focus on these areas. Those who are overly influenced by spiritual pretensions can always be reminded that a metaphysical teacher is not a superhuman being, regardless of what he may say. He may or may not be learned in his subject, but his solemn pronouncements are no more important than the opinions of other people, unless he can justify his claims with reasonable and understandable evidence. Bearing this thought in mind, the seeker of truth can avoid making a mistake in choosing the subject at hand. Inadequate study methods are a very common mistake. This happens because the average person doesn't know how to discipline their thoughts. A frequent error is immersing oneself in a religious doctrine to the exclusion of all other considerations in life. The fanatic will read day and night, taking only enough time to attend meetings of their chosen cult. They live solely for their new beliefs and burn out within a few weeks. The mind, unaccustomed to such exertion, becomes exhausted and confused, and loses the integrity of its perspective. Life takes on a constant air of seriousness for the novice in the mystical arts. Those obsessed with the problem of their eternal salvation have no time to rest or relax. The advanced students are always ready to tell me that simple, mundane human affairs no longer interest them, that they have evolved beyond the ordinary because their lives are wholly dedicated to the truth. That whole attitude is wrong. No sound educational institution would allow students to reflect on any subject continuously for months, let alone years, without rest or relaxation. Contrast is necessary for the normal functioning of the intellect, and where there is no contrast, there is no thought. Religious beliefs are as addictive as narcotics, and the damage caused in both cases is equally severe. The religious addict degenerates into a fanatic, and all progress is lost. 1 hour a day of abstract metaphysical study is all the average mind can safely sustain. Additional hours hinder rather than help. When the designated period of study ends, the wise student closes the book, disconnects their mind from metaphysical thought, and turns their attention to other matters concerning ordinary human beings. No student is so advanced that they cannot laugh and play profitably, maintain social contacts, continue their entertainment, and attend to their usual tasks. Science, art, literature, and sociology are as important for cultivating a well-rounded philosophical perspective as mystical religion. Occult diseases are unlikely to affect well-balanced minds, but they are always a threat to one-sided minds. Those who delve into their religious contemplations often find themselves in domestic difficulties. They burden the entire family with their immature opinions, neglect their children, allow their homes to fall into disrepair, and fail in their responsibilities as husbands or wives. For those of a practical mind, such spiritual beliefs are not particularly appealing. Thus, the zealot is likely to feel misunderstood and even persecuted by their relatives, when the fault is truly their own. An excellent way to stay grounded is to balance occult studies with their correspondences in the physical sciences or philosophies. Those interested in alchemy might take a chemistry course. If astrology is everything, the study of astronomy is the remedy. Those interested in the mystical aspects of comparative religion might well enroll in a university course on the subject. The foolish belief that must be eliminated is that one is wasting time on unenlightened formal education. Throughout the country, opportunities exist for men and women whose educational advantages have been limited to extracurricular courses or adult education sessions at night schools. Public libraries can provide balanced home reading programs on most vital subjects. By taking advantage of these facilities, the sincere seeker of truth can educate themselves in the great systems of human thought that have shaped the world. Suppose someone is interested in Buddhism. Several of the largest universities offer courses on Eastern religions. These cover the conditions that gave rise to Buddhism, the sphere of its influence, the best available information about the historical Buddha, the faith he founded, the councils by which he changed its course, and the means by which its doctrine spread throughout Asia. When one is armed with a solid, practical knowledge of Buddhist philosophy, misinformation can be immediately detected, and admired teachings can also be authoritatively defended. This was one of my recommendations to Mrs. Elsie Redlick when she came to me seeking help in sorting through a jumble of neo-Buddhist nonsense she had gathered from several ill-informed but highly imaginative teachers. Mrs. Redlick was appalled at the prospect of actually studying Buddhism under academic supervision. "I could never study every day," she exclaimed. "I don't know how to study, and I could never remember all those horrible names, dates, and places, and write down answers to the questions. Why, I just don't have that kind of mind. I don't want a pile of dry facts. I want enlightenment." This good lady was trying to study the most profound and complicated philosophical system in the world, and yet she admitted to having the kind of mind that couldn't learn the simple historical facts of Buddhism in school. She, of course, didn't wish to improve her mind. All she wanted was to reach nirvana effortlessly. And this is true of many metaphysicians. They don't want to strive for knowledge. They are content to listen to their favorite teacher and let him think for them. They desire the rewards of wisdom without the long and difficult process of becoming wise. Strict but comprehensive guidance. If it is already too late to establish proper thought patterns, then it is necessary to repair, as far as possible, the damage caused by incorrect habits. When a person with mental difficulties seeks help, strict but understanding guidance is needed. The patient must understand that they will follow the treatment described by the healer to the letter. If they refuse to accept such a program, then they should be dismissed immediately. It is also wise to reject the case when it is evident that the patient has mental reservations and is likely to disobey the instructions despite their promises. There is little success with patients who feel they know more than the doctor. If the psychological disturbance results from false or inadequate teaching, the patient must sever all ties with the organization or teacher responsible for the problem. Only under this condition should the case be addressed. If the teachings themselves are sound, and the difficulty stems from a misunderstanding or misapplication of the principles, the errors must be corrected, and then the mind should be given a period of rest and readjustment. If extreme nervousness or hallucinations occur, all metaphysical studies and developmental exercises of any kind should be suspended for at least a year after the last of the unpleasant symptoms has disappeared. Once the nervous system has been altered, it remains extremely sensitive for some time to the causes that produce the specific stress. In other respects, the nerves may appear quite normal, but if they are again confronted with a similar type of stress, the nervous structure will show damage almost immediately. Some devotees will not stop their exercises because they fear that doing so will delay the development of their spiritual nature. One person told me, "I would rather die than give up my hidden growth." She made her choice. She died less than a year later in a psychiatric hospital. The physical examination. The procedure with a patient includes a complete physical examination, with particular attention to chronic diseases, the nervous system, the endocrine glands, the eyes, and the teeth. Mystical speculations seem to have a particular difficulty with glandular functions. And, conversely, if the glands are disturbed, the mental and emotional natures are particularly susceptible to psychic disturbances. Since many metaphysicians neglect their physical health, either through addiction to methods of mental healing, or through prejudice against physicians, the physical examination usually reveals a number of conditions requiring correction. Next, to proceed in the proper order, one must consider diet, and there is a wide variety of fads in this area. Religious movements that impose diets on their members rarely investigate the nutritional requirements of each individual. One group with followers in northern Siberia required these poor people to stop eating meat and wearing furs, a death sentence in that arid frozen country. Those suffering from nervous and mental illnesses should be encouraged to eat normally and wisely, nutritious foods prepared appropriately. 3 well-balanced meals, eaten regularly and enjoyed, will greatly contribute to clearing up mental difficulties. Mysterious symptoms may arise from nervous stomach problems aggravated by the belief that one gains spiritual merit by attempting to deprive the body of low-vibration foods. In my experience, excessive consumption of citrus fruits can cause occasional but significant problems. They should be consumed in moderation by people who suffer from nervous excitement or irritability. Some people thrive on one type of diet, others on another. There's no way to create a food program that will work for everyone. Generally, a simple and delicious meal of familiar foods in moderate portions yields the best results. It's certainly a mistake to be so focused on what you eat that you have no time or energy left to improve your life in other ways. Emotional frustrations. Since emotional frustrations lead many unhappy people to study religion, these frustrations are next on the list to be investigated. Generally, religion doesn't solve emotional problems. It merely transforms impulses and obscures their natural source. Repressed emotions, unrequited love, unhappy marriages, disastrous romances, tragic sexual experiences, and general disillusionment may all be involved whenever a person turns to religion with fanatical devotion. Because women reflect more on these matters than men, Women are likely to predominate in religious organizations. People who harbor resentment and sorrow tend toward a solitary life. They have few friends, and their melancholic tendencies are not geared toward attracting or maintaining acquaintances. Therefore, it is always helpful to examine the patient's social life in order to diagnose and treat. If mysticism is used merely to fill the days of a solitary existence, the patient should be encouraged to expand their circle of friends and take a more active part in the life of their community and neighborhood. The extroversion that results from participating in social activities is an excellent and normal way to overcome inhibitions. The tendency to be alone and suffer in silence is detrimental, not only to the individual but also contrary to all the laws of social existence. The temperaments of our time complicate this situation. It is not easy to find agreeable people, and most social groups tend toward extravagance and dissipation. But external contacts are necessary, and with a little thought, a suitable avenue for social expression will be discovered. Hobbies are important for an individual's balanced life. All metaphysicians should have hobbies completely separate from their spiritual beliefs. Hobbies broaden perspectives, increase the store of useful knowledge, stimulate social contacts, and relieve internal tension. When neurotic tendencies are very pronounced, the individual will find that a hobby can provide very constructive relief and comfort. An occupation has potential economic advantages and may also lead to a future vocation. But regardless of the circumstances, hobbies are valuable for complementing the dominant interests of the personality. I have encountered several cases where spiritual studies were used as a means of escaping real, personal problems. Both the French and Russian revolutions were partly caused by this approach to vital issues. The aristocracy exploited the people, and the clergy merely advised patience in the face of hardship. In the end, the people rose up and destroyed both church and state. Let me give an example of this condition as it exists in the lives of modern truth seekers. Mrs. Lucille Stewart told her story in these words: "If it weren't for my studies of the truth, I couldn't live with my husband for another day. He is selfish, insensitive, and completely absorbed in his own affairs. We have nothing in common, but he is mikamaso. I will stay with him and be patient until the law of life sets me free." Her attitude was noble and kind, but completely impractical and unsound. First, she was contributing to her husband's neglect by selfishly allowing him to continue without correcting himself or becoming concerned. And second, she was damaging her own psychological well-being by depriving herself, year after year, of the natural companionship and sympathy to which she was entitled. Nothing good came of the situation for either of them, except for the wife's great development of patience in the face of such frustration. Mrs. Stewart had been led to religion by this very frustration, and by a lack of courage to put her house in order. She should have corrected her domestic difficulties through a simple application of common sense. When she came to me, Mrs. Stewart was suffering from hallucinations and a variety of nervous ailments. There was no possibility of permanent correction until she resolved the mess in her emotional life. Instead of inspiring her to resolve this problem, religion was merely giving her the patience to endure something she had no need to be enduring. Attempting to practice the metaphysical disciplines of different faiths simultaneously often leads to problems. This is not open-mindedness, but rather dangerous eclecticism. It is always advisable to make a list of the patient's affiliations from the time they first became interested in mysticism. Many clues will be uncovered this way. Sometimes the error lies not in the current teachings, but in old notions that linger in the recesses of the mind. It is also helpful to review what the individual is currently reading. They may have been reading dangerous literature, which is abundant these days, the irremediable, the cooperative, those who make mistakes. The patient's character and disposition must be carefully considered when recommending a treatment system. The spiritually ill are divided into 3 distinct classes according to their mentality and temperament. The first category comprises cases that are almost, if not entirely, irremediable. This does not mean that the illness itself is incurable, but rather that the addiction to naive beliefs is incurable. If such people are helped out of one difficulty, they will immediately fall into another. Sound reasoning is absent-minded, disconnected from their own thinking, full of cliches and noble generalities, and completely incapable of resisting the persuasive powers of fraudulent teachers and cults. The second group comprises those who still retain a considerable portion of their innate intelligence, and will cooperate within certain limitations. There is a good chance these individuals will return to normal, and they are protected from the most obvious religious scams. This group will follow the instructions given, but most of their decisions must be made by themselves, as they possess a certain innate talent for spiritual speculation. The third and smallest division comprises men and women with unquestionable skills and intelligence who have made some mistakes, but who possess the mental capacity to resolve their problems once they understand the causes. These individuals will perform their duties cheerfully and enthusiastically, and can be corrected in almost every case. Only extensive experience can grant skill in diagnosing and treating metaphysical illnesses. While all cases are very similar in principle, the personality equation complicates each problem, since the patient is almost certainly acting against their own best interests. However, long familiarity with the subject allows the physician to accurately assess the situation, even before the patient has begun to recount their story. Restoration to normality. If all the circumstances listed in this section have been reviewed and analyzed, the healer possesses most of the information necessary to form the basis of the treatment. The minor details will fall into place, and the case can be considered as a whole, a pattern of the complete problem. In a general work of this kind, it is not possible to explain the formulas used in the treatment of every combination of mystical maladjustment. Here again, experience is the only sure guide, experience derived from a deep knowledge of occult philosophies and honed through years of practical application. The general and basic rule of treatment is that normality must be restored. What is abnormal for any person is dangerous to their life and health. This is true even if the abnormality results from a sincere effort to live a religious belief that is beyond the believer's understanding or capacity. There is no truth in the notion that God will protect fools because they are sincere in their foolishness. It is entirely possible to get into serious trouble while seeking the truth if the seeker breaks natural laws along the way. The deity only protects those who are too wise not to attempt to violate his laws. The happy, simple, and humane paths are the best paths for the common man. There are those who possess extraordinary abilities that qualify them to explore the mysteries of magic and the occult sciences, but it is extremely inappropriate for the average person to attempt the works of genius. If the passion for the mystical arts is strong and irresistible, then a proper foundation must be established through study and research under correct instruction. It is evident that a person who cannot distinguish a false teacher from a true one is not yet ready to seek the great spiritual intangibles of the universe. It may seem that this book attacks all mystical philosophies, but that is not the intention. It is a volume dedicated to metaphysical healing, and therefore has little space to devote to the spiritually healthy. But they do exist, and in considerable numbers, among those who have found in their beliefs the strength and courage to face life's problems and perfect their own character. They have approached the subject calmly and intelligently, have never been involved in dubious organizations, have never followed questionable teachers, and have never tried to complete the work of ages in a few years. and by not seeking help for their problems, they have remained free of them by using common sense. Once, 25 centuries ago, the Greek sage Thales of Miletus was walking along a narrow path at night, discussing the stars with his disciples. His eyes and attention fixed on the celestial bodies, he lost sight of the path beneath his feet and fell into a muddy ditch. Thales never forgot this. He liked to remind his students that humankind is so firmly placed in the order of living beings that they can gaze at the heavens as they please, but they must also watch their step, or they are bound to have an accident. Human beings are spiritual beings with feet of clay. In their eagerness to unleash their divine potential, they can forget that they are bound to the earth by a physical nature with certain needs that must be met.